that is not a light.
It looks like
No, there's no light.
There's no light. What is that? It was a light.
bulby.
It's what?
Looks bulby. It's not a bulb.
It's never worked though.
Okay, never mind. Okay. So
You can just
is there,
lift that
can we
sleeve.
lift that a little bit? Is that, will that really affect the? Is that screwing up the?
No, no.
Okay, that's a little better. It's just quite dark over here.
Yeah, nothing.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Unless somebody knows some trick.
That's fine.
So in about 2 minutes, I'm just going to come up and tell everybody to take a seat. We're going to be starting to. We're still waiting for like 6, 7 people, but I think.
That subway's crazy. Richard Brown from American Express, our program's lead sponsor. That's a general government from Mexico.
Oh, great. We have big presence in Mexico.
Yeah,
City.
yeah, that's why.
Very large.
That's why
I think we have 5,000 employees there.
Yeah, it's a wonderful building.
I've never been to the building, but it apparently did okay post the earthquake, which would have
Yeah, it's
happened.
like, I think it's, they built it 6 years ago.
Yeah.
President Nick President is in New York. Many countries of the world, and it's probably has a lot of problems. And Mexico,
We've done a number of
Done
different
a number of
programs.
different projects over the years. And right now, the one that's at work is in Chapultepec, the entry pavilion, which is being turned into a business center.
Right. We've done things with there were a series of sculptures that were done in 1968.
Yes.
Yeah. Funding to restore some of those. I think they actually had many had to be moved because of something that was going on where they originally were placed. So
some of them were moved, others were left in the place where they were considered for. Because back then, 1968, when the Olympics happened, of course, Mexico City was not as big as it is today. So, in terms of preserving them better, others were just left beautiful. The friendship route is cool.
yeah, and they had a kind of a bicycle race or some type of race there. Sometimes it was one of the
They did a really good watch day there, so I think that was they did a
race. The bikes made when people walking. We have a pretty active volunteer engagement program there. I know that we had participate in that. So got a great guy there who works with our program affairs, guy named Jorge. He's very active in getting things done in Mexico. So in addition to work that we do for the fund, we've also done support. We have a grant, I think that was just recently approved for the Art Museum to get the second time and others in Mexico City. So he's been very active to get programs both in the historic preservation as well as in our leadership. We do a lot of grant making and developing nonprofit leaders. So he's also been very active with that as well. So great to do stuff in Mexico City. I've been there myself. Fabulous place. The Anthropology Museum is probably the most fantastic museum of its type in the world. So it's always good to see artifacts that you can't see anywhere else. I agree.
Oh, really?
So going there is just like
Any sort of specialties? I mean,
no, it was just undergraduate. I've never actually pursued anthropology or archaeology, but this is the closest I got to funding.
morning. Well, I was going to tell everybody to take their seat, but just walking towards the podium, everybody sat down. So it's a very obedient group. We're still waiting for a couple of people because, of course, this morning the MTA decided to have a nervous breakdown, and but we're not going to let it mar our 2018 World Monuments Watch announcement. I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and my job is really very easy. I'm going to introduce you to our president, Josh David, who will take you through some of the themes and special sites on the 2018 World Monuments Watch.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for coming today and for struggling with whatever forms of transportation you had to struggle with to get here. Thank you for joining us this morning for the announcement of the 2018 World Monuments Watch. I'm Joshua David, President and CEO of World Monuments Fund. World Monuments Fund was established in 1965 to protect and conserve treasured sites around the globe. We've worked in over 120 countries, partnering with local stakeholders to implement advocacy, documentation, training, and conservation field projects. Since 1996, the World Monuments Watch has been our signature advocacy program, a call to action for cultural sites under threat and treasured places of extraordinary opportunity. Every 2 years, citizens, activists, and experts nominate the places they passionately want to protect and conserve for elevation to the global stage. This year, the 2018 World Monuments Watch includes 25 sites where grassroots advocacy and conservation initiatives can preserve memory, strengthen social bonds, and ensure the future of our built heritage. We are excited to share them with you this morning. Now, I am pleased to introduce Richard Brown, Vice President of Philanthropy at American Express, founding partner of the World Monuments Watch.
Thanks, Josh, for the introduction and for all the fund's efforts to save the world's most important cultural heritage sites. As the founding sponsor of the Watch, American Express has been an unwavering advocate for the World Monuments Fund's mission to protect our most treasured landmarks around the globe. Over the past 22 years, American Express has contributed nearly $18 million to the program, helping to preserve 166 heritage sites in 71 countries. In turn, our commitment has catalyzed a renewed appreciation for preservation worldwide. Historic preservation has long been the hallmark of our company's involvement in the communities where our card members and employees live and work. As the world's largest travel network, American Express has a deep understanding of the influence buildings and landmarks can have on society. We recognize these sites as symbols of national and local identity and value the role that their preservation can play in attracting visitors and revitalizing communities. Unfortunately, year after year, the same trends continue to endanger the world's most treasured places of remembrance, reverence, and architectural significance. The Watch is a call to action, mobilizing citizens to take the first step in preserving the sites at the heart of their communities. Being named to the Watch is a glimmer of hope that all of these places will survive for future generations. But I'd like to focus on what can be for these sites by providing a few updates on projects we sponsored for the 2016 Watch. Like the sites you will learn about today, the sites I'm about to discuss were also impacted by environmental disasters, human conflict, and neglect. However, through civic and government engagement, as well as expert preservationists, we've been able to bring them back to life for a new generation. In 2015, a devastating earthquake rocked Nepal, claiming thousands of lives and damaging many examples of the country's cultural heritage, including Charnarayan, the oldest of temples in Patan's Durbar Square. Support from American Express and the World Monuments Fund is helping the Kathmandu Valley Preservation Trust rebuild the temple, ensuring it remains accessible to place of worship for the community. Following an explosion from a car bomb in 1993, the Arch of Janus, a surviving building in the Great Marketplace in ancient Rome, has remained in disrepair and accessible to the public. Through the support of American Express and the World Monuments Fund, local groups launched the conservation program to completely restore the monument and welcome visitors back to the site. The arch sits near the temples of Hercules and Patronus, previously conserved through support from American Express and the fund. Neglected in 1910, the Gatehouse building at Chapultepec Park in Mexico City once served as an access point to a military school. Support from American Express and the fund is being used to transform the site into a museum and orientation center, educating 21st century visitors about the 19th century origin of the park. All these sites are still works in progress. They become beacons for their local communities, proof that through programs like the Watch, we can join forces to create sustainable futures for historic places. Over the next few months, we will be reviewing the 2018 Watch to determine how we, American Express, can assist in preserving a number of these sites through our grant-making efforts. We hope you will join us to spread the message about the importance of preservation and the impact we have together on the world's most special places. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Richard. Now, the announcement. Every 2 years, World Monuments Fund and an international panel of heritage experts in the fields of archaeology, architecture, art history, and preservation reviews site nominations from around the globe. After detailed discussion and deliberation, panelists identified the most threatened sites and the most compelling conservation opportunities, all nominated by local stakeholders who are passionately working to save the places they love. Each of the 2018 Watch sites has deeply significant human meaning. They are places where we live, work, create, play, and worship. They tell stories about the people who built them originally and the people who inhabit them now. This year, several key themes emerged during the selection process. We will present 4 of these themes this morning. The first, places threatened, damaged, or destroyed by human conflict, a theme that defines 4 of the 2018 Watch sites. In recent years, the world's oldest historic cities have become battlegrounds. The 2018 Watch includes the Souk in Aleppo, a community hub burned during conflict.
The souk is really the beating heart of the old city. My dad and I were able to go into the old city of Aleppo, which he had dedicated about 20 years of his life to preserving it. And it was harrowing and it was shocking. But, we'd be walking through the streets and climbing over rubble, just looking at everything and thinking, okay, this can be rebuilt. And of course, it's very symbolic. You rebuild the souk, you've rebuilt the heart of the old city, of the pride, the history of the people. This is part of our identity as people from Aleppo.
The Al-Hadba Minaret in Mosul, an iconic landmark destroyed by ISIS.
Growing in Baghdad, I've traveled a lot to the north, to Mosul. In each and every trip, you would see Al-Hadba. It was just part of the identity of the city of Mosul and its people. It's true that memories live in our heads and they're written as history in books, but the built environment is an immediate reminder of the events involved in our lives. So the destruction of a building or a community or even a neighborhood, it does result in forgetting. Eventually people will forget and the city will change face.
The old city of Taiz in Yemen, a heritage-rich capital engulfed by war, and Sukur cultural landscape in Nigeria, targeted by Boko Haram.
Le 12 décembre 2014, Boko Haram est venu ici. Ils ont tout brûlé, tout détruit. Plus tard, les gens sont revenus toujours présents quand on a un problème. Il ne laissera jamais tomber son frère ou sa sœur qui souffrent. C'est une question de principe ici à Sukur.
We are looking beyond the destruction of individual monuments to the devastation of the social fabric of entire towns and cities. What happens to a place and its memories when so much is lost? And what is the right approach to rebuilding? Conflict destroys much more than buildings. It also brings mass displacement that divides individuals and communities from their places of meaning and memory. When destruction is so widespread, complex questions arise about how to rebuild. Our goal at World Monuments Fund is to empower local stakeholders to define their community's conservation goals and to help them achieve them. Next, we explore a group of buildings that tells the story of our national struggle for social justice, the Alabama Civil Rights Sites. The start of the Selma to Montgomery March, a refuge for a group of freedom riders, a bombing that brought national attention to a nonviolent movement. These are just some of the events that took place during the Civil Rights Movement at a collection of little-known buildings in Alabama, which we now include on the 2018 watch. A local group has proposed designating these structures to a consortium representing this defining moment in American history.
Martin Luther King called Robert Kennedy for him to federalize the troops, which he did. The National Guard came and picked up the Freedom Riders in the wee hours of the morning and brought them to our home. So we were responsible for housing them, giving them a safe haven for those 4 days.
There's power in unity, that these sites united have the opportunity to leverage resources and harness their creativity in a way that will benefit all of them.
These sites represent the activities by the people, for the people, in a social justice movement that transformed the state, the nation, and indeed the world. And now they will be preserved for many, many generations to come.
The start are the pivotal events that took place within their walls and the social movement they represent. In these homes where people still live, and in these churches where people still worship, history unfolded, a living history, vitally relevant today. We are pleased to be joined this morning by Priscilla Cooper, Project Director of the Alabama Civil Rights Sites, a project of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Priscilla will tell us about the challenges and opportunities presented by these important places.
Good morning. It is indeed an honor for me to represent the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, our president and CEO, Andrea Taylor, and the Alabama African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium. Long name, rich, rich, rich history. The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is celebrating landmarks this year with the 25th anniversary in November and recent designation as part of the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument. So to be part of the World Monuments Fund watch list designation is another pivotal moment for us. The 14 places of worship and lodging included in the nomination are representative of dozens of sites in Alabama that played significant roles in the African American struggle for freedom. As noted, this consortium does include churches that have become international icons, identified with major events in the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. You've seen images of Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church, which is noted for its role in the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, and its role as a launching place for the 1965 Selma to Montgomery March for voting rights. However, this consortium also includes little-known places like the Benmore Motel and the Dr. Richard Harris House in Montgomery and the Jackson Family Home in Selma that provided safe haven for Black travelers during segregation and secure meeting places for activists during the movement. Taken together, these sites provide a historical, social, and cultural context that is much greater than the single decade, that 1955 to 1965 period, that is commonly referred to in popular culture as the civil rights movement. Whether prominent or unknown, These sites have been sustained through the passion, commitment, and Herculean efforts of dedicated volunteers who are committed to preserving not only these historic properties, but their important stories. These are stories of individuals and institutions that laid the foundation for the civil rights movement that truly redefined how we view ourselves as Americans and continues to shine as a beacon of hope for those struggling for human rights around the globe. As noted by our project historian, Georgette Norman, many of these sites trace their history back more than 100 years. From Reconstruction through the early 20th century, these institutions were the heart and soul of the Black community. These were the incubators for Black education, entrepreneurship, advancement, and achievement. During the years when Black life was circumscribed by racial bigotry, oppression, disenfranchisement, and vigilante violence, these institutions nurtured an individual and collective determination to rise above limited expectations and circumstances to strive for excellence. In the aftermath of the 1960s and the Civil Rights Movement, these sites, along with their communities, have suffered from the negative consequences of displacement, urban renewal, interstate highways, and neighborhood disinvestment. In spite of these challenges, today, these sites remain firm in their commitment to engage a new generation to use this shared history as a tool for community revival, renewal, and revitalization. The World Monuments Fund Watch List designation will provide visibility and credibility as these sites work to fulfill their commitment. The WMF Watch List provides a global platform, and we are so excited, for Alabama's African American civil rights heritage sites to share their remarkable stories and to gain the resources required to sustain them. Since submitting the nomination, the Birmingham Civil Rights has identified additional sites and convened representatives to begin the process of developing an alliance that will allow them to use their collective strength to meet their distinctive challenges. So just the process of doing the nomination has already created great energy and synergy for these sites. With support from the Education Foundation of America, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute will work in partnership with the World Monuments Fund and Alabama's African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites to bring light to their hidden history, providing both inspiration and instruction to those seeking to understand this history and to continue the work to secure human rights, equality, and dignity for our global community. And we thank you very much.
Thank you, Priscilla. Helping communities rebuild following natural disaster has been at the core of our work going back to the 1966 floods in Venice. This theme could not be more timely or urgent. Just as we were concluding our review process, Hurricanes Harvey and Irma and the earthquakes in Mexico hit one after another. In response, we call attention to the conservation needs of disaster sites of the Caribbean, the Gulf, and Mexico by including them on the 2018 watch. In addition, we include the town of Amatrice in Italy, much of which was reduced to rubble in the earthquake of 2016. Just weeks ago, a series of earthquakes and hurricanes shook our world. In recognition of the devastation brought by natural catastrophe to places of cultural heritage, we include disaster sites of Mexico, the Gulf, and the Caribbean on the 2018 watch. Also on this year's watch, the historic town of Amatrice in Italy, almost completely destroyed by earthquake in 2016. Today, the city remains uninhabited and inaccessible. As in the past, from the floods of Venice in 1966 to the 2015 earthquake in Nepal, disaster response has been central to our work. We will continue to strengthen community resilience and put disaster-struck sites on the road to recovery. Following a natural disaster, our first priority must always be the safety and well-being of people who need food, water, power, and shelter. But another layer of loss comes with the annihilation of treasured sites. They are the heart and soul of any community. Following a disaster, World Monuments Fund helps devastated community restore the buildings and places that define their values and identity. We're pleased to be building a partnership with Mexico through Consul General Diego Gomez Pickering to assess damage to cultural heritage sites in Mexico and determine where, working together, we can help. Consul General Gomez Pickering joins us this morning.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to Joshua David and the World Monument Fund for the opportunity of partnering with you to enhance what for the last decades the World Monument Fund has been doing south of the border, and it is preserving very important sites. As many of you know, during the past month, 2 devastating earthquakes hit Mexico. The first one on the 7th of September in the southwest coast in between the borders of the Oaxaca and Chiapas states. The second one on the 19th of September, the same day that 32 years ago a devastating earthquake in 1985 led to the loss of over 10,000 lives in Mexico City. The latest earthquake, with its epicenter just south of Mexico City, led to huge devastation as well. Over 500 people lost their lives, and over thousands of buildings were damaged across the nation. Most importantly, over 600 historical monuments were somehow damaged. Mexico is a country on the American continent with the widest number of historical sites inscribed in UNESCO's World Heritage List. Almost 40 sites that tell the great history of the nation that has been developing for the last 30 millennia are part of this wide heritage that, of course, was very affected on the 2 earthquakes. Part of each of those communities that have been affected are centers like the ones we see over here, churches in little towns, plazas, pre-Hispanic sites from pyramids to temples. These are very important sites for each of those communities. Many families I've talked to directly are more concerned about the rebuilding of these places because of what they mean to their communities and their families and their little towns and the country itself than by the rebuilding of their houses. So this is medular for them. And for us at the Government of Mexico, specifically here at the Consulate General, this wonderful partnership that is being launched and announced today means a lot. It means a lot because it does symbolize the power of culture and the importance of looking back at history, but also the importance of looking into the future by reassessing the relevance of those sites and how those sites really connect the 2 countries, these 2 wonderful countries that are neighbors, the U.S. and Mexico. Amongst the many sites that were damaged during the earthquake and that we're going to be assessing in the next few months are monuments that might have been built in Mexico, but at a certain point symbolize a nation that was not defined by borders, as we might have heard in recent times. Sites that are located across the Texan-Tamaulipan border, or sites that are across the Sonora and Arizonan border. This talks much more about who we are than anything that we might read in the press. It's this culture and this united heritage that we are more concerned about preserving. The destruction might be irreversible, but we need to hold on to memory and the documents and buildings that make our history. There's much that we can do. We certainly find in the World Monuments Fund a great partner in this. Just a couple of weeks ago here in New York City at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Mexican Cultural Institute celebrated its 25th anniversary. And during that anniversary,
We raise funds, of course, for those in need south of the border, but also for all these buildings that need some funds to get on their feet again. One of them specifically was the temple of San Juan Bautista in Cuauchintan in Puebla. This is a site. It's located in the southern state of Puebla, which is bordering Mexico City. And it's a convent that was built in between 1528 and 1554 on top of a site of a pre-Hispanic temple, a Tolteca Chichimeca foundation. Many of these sites that were struck by the earthquake are important because they do not only tell the recent history, but also the old history. Many of these churches, many of these temples, many of these sites of congregation were built upon temples that existed before the arrival of the Europeans, that people for centuries or millennia have been doing pilgrimage to, and that have been concentrating people. So they really accumulate all those 30 millennia of Mexico's history. We, with the World Monument Fund, the World Monument Fund, along with local interlocutors, including American Express, as was mentioned earlier, have been working on some of these sites. The San Juan Bautista, the Cuauchintan church in Puebla is important because it's symbolic. Most of the Mexican community in New York comes from the state of Puebla. Puebla was one of the areas that was most hardly hit by the second earthquake on the 19th of September. The temple that has so wonderfully been restored thanks to the World Monument Fund got again affected after the earthquake. So now some of the funds that were raised during that event with the Mexican Cultural Institute are going to go into the revision of the temple and to assess which other sites across the nation from the Texan-Tamaulipan border down to the Guatemalan and Chiapan border need to be addressed. This is also important because in Puebla is where Mexico was born as a nation. When the Europeans arrived in the early part of the 16th century, that's where they encountered the old civilization that has inhabited this continent before the arrival of many other people from Asia or from across in Europe. It's there that the two cultures met, the old European Christian civilization and the ancient millennia-old pre-Hispanic civilizations from the Maya to the Aztecs. It is in Puebla that the two of them came together and the two of them creating something new, this wonderful mix that we are all part of and that represents that diversity that doesn't know any borders. So we're pleased again with the World Monument Fund. This inclusion as part of the 28 watch list is very important because it will allow us to assess that shared heritage across the border and to build so that heritage is preserved and new generations understand the importance of getting to know different communities and different cultural influences and to build together a better society for the future. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, we turn our focus to heritage threatened by the impacts of climate change, represented in the 2018 watch by Blackpool Piers in England.
The world is warming. Our seas are rising. The world is warming. Our seas are rising. Storms are intensifying. And as a result, heritage is often in peril. Blackpool Piers in England are included in the 2018 watch to highlight the global threat of climate change to our most cherished historic sites.
They are 100-year-old structures which have suffered the battering and beating of the Irish Sea coast. You know, I remember fishing for crabs off the North Pier jetty.
The thrill of feeling that I was actually walking over the sea. We used to dance most Wednesday afternoons.
This is about understanding what potentially we might do now to future-proof them. It's pointless making a fuss when it's gone. This is the time, now is the time to be making a fuss.
So are threats to modern sites, cultural landscapes, and heritage in rapidly growing urban centers. All of these themes are represented in the 2018 World Monuments Watch and which are discussed in the Watch magazine you will receive today. Now, I am pleased to present in brief the remaining sites that complete the 2008 2018 World Monuments Watch. Government House in Antigua and Barbuda. Once restored, the historic structure will serve as a beacon for community and educational activities. Sirius Building in Sydney, Australia. The storied public housing development is for sale and faces the risk of demolition if heritage protection is not granted. Ramal Talca Constitucion in Chile. Strong community attachment surrounds the last rural railway branch in Chile, which was recently damaged by forest fires. Grand Theater of Prince Kung's Mansion in Beijing, China. Within the city's most celebrated princely residence, the theater building is in need of repairs and restoration, drawing on the best local and international expertise. Eliyahu Hanavi Synagogue in Alexandria, Egypt, one of 2 remaining synagogues in a once flourishing Jewish community. Taqiyat al-Gulshani in Cairo, Egypt. A Sufi religious foundation, currently in a state of abandonment, is in need of a new vision for future use. Potager du Roi in Versailles, France. Stakeholders are poised to reimagine the stewardship of the historic kitchen garden of the Palace of Versailles, a place of instruction and experimentation. Post-independence architecture of Delhi, India. This diverse group of modern sites, built following the country's independence from Britain, deserves greater appreciation and legal protection against demolition. Lifta in Jerusalem, Israel. The ruins of a Palestinian village are threatened by a redevelopment plan that has faced popular opposition. Kagawa Prefectural Gymnasium in Takamatsu, Japan. This modern landmark is now closed to the public as its rehabilitation poses a technical challenge and a new use is sought. Jewish quarter of Essaouira, Morocco. This crumbling district remains a symbol of the pluralism of Moroccan culture. Historic Karachi in Pakistan. The built heritage of Karachi is imperiled by massive population growth, and new solutions will be needed for its protection and revitalization. Cerro de Oro in Peru. A monumental archaeological site seeks sustainable development solutions as it contends with looting and encroachment. Tebeda Leonesa in León, Spain. The rural communities of this area face challenges of preserving the character of their villages in the face of growing tourism and development. Chao Phraya River in Bangkok, Thailand. The proposed construction of an elevated promenade threatens to irreversibly transform the city's historic relation to the Chao Phraya River. Buffalo Central Terminal in New York. Investment in its redevelopment would give new life to an architectural landmark and its surrounding community. And finally, Matobo Hills Cultural Landscape in Zimbabwe, one of the world's great rock art collections, with paintings over 10,000 years old, is threatened by deforestation and the risk of fires. Each of these 25 sites is a unique place of beautiful artistry that carries a distinctive meaning for a community of people. Now the work begins as we rally champions of cultural heritage globally to support the long-term protection and stewardship of these treasured places. We will now open the floor for questions. I would like to reintroduce Lisa Ackerman, Executive Vice President of World Monuments Fund, who will moderate the discussion. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Josh. In addition to our audience here, we also have been streaming this on Facebook Live. So one of my colleagues at World Monuments Fund is moderating the questions that may come to us through Facebook, and we're happy to take those questions as well. So I'm happy to open the floor to questions. And in addition to Josh and myself, there are also obviously our guests who spoke this morning and some of my World Monuments Fund colleagues. So we'll deploy the questions to the best person who can answer them. Are there any questions? Wendy?
Do you have any sense of trying to balance this out worldwide? In other words, if you've done 3 Italys in a row, you've try to look to a different country, or is it just a question of who presents the most compelling request?
Well, I think since we've started the program in 1996, in each cycle we've tried to have a good balance of geography and site type and issues, whether they're threats or opportunities. I think it's never perfect, and we are very dependent on what comes into us. So in this round, we had 170 fully complete nominations, from which we selected 25 sites. In years past, there have been different numbers of sites on the watch, and then we always have a very robust group of sites, so there's always nominations that you wish you could put on, but you really can't include everybody. I think if you look across the 800 sites that have been on the watch from 1996 to now, it's reasonably well balanced geographically, but there are always countries that we wish would come forward more significantly with nominations. Anyone else? Yes?
What is the process, Lisa? How do you choose?
Well, it's actually a year-long process. So we start with a call to nominations, which in this case started in September 2016. We accept nominations through February in this cycle in any case. And during the course of that cycle, we're in a constant dialogue with nominators who ask questions, and we reach out to a network of really about 20,000 people between our networks and affinity groups such as the International Council of Monuments and Sites. And then once the nominations are in, we have a staff review. So both staff here in New York and our non-New York-based staff. We engage the International Council of Monuments and Sites in the review process, which is two-pronged. So every nation that has an ECOMOS chapter can comment on the sites relevant to their nation, as well as the scientific committees. So there's scientific committees that ECOMOS runs on historic towns, pilgrimage routes, archaeology, underwater archaeology, et cetera, modern 20th century buildings. So there's the opportunity both on a governmental nation level as well as a scientific specialized committee. We collect those ECOMOS reviews. Then we have what here on the staff we call Watch Week. We bring all of our staff in from around the world for 1 week in July. And we review all of the nominations and the comments that we've received from outside reviewers. And then the final step is we convene an outside expert panel that really helps finalize the list. And to Wendy Moonan's question about balance, that's where, once again, the panel often asks that question about balance. So no system is ever perfect, but between internal reviewers, expert reviewers, and the panel, we hope that we've had a lot of eyes looking on the full breadth of nominations and pulling together a list that's meaningful. Hillary, other questions from Facebook?
I have one Facebook Live question from Nana. The Caribbean is a very large area. What do you envision you can contribute to the reconstruction in such a large swath?
That's a great question, and I think one of the answers is one of our external panelists was Alessandra Cummings, who's from Barbados and is part of the Caribbean Museum Network. And she actually wrote to us this morning to say that there's a gathering of the members of the Caribbean Museum Network in Miami later this month. And one of the things we hope will come out of that gathering is a greater sense of exactly what the damage is in the Caribbean, as well as the very small islands that may not get as much attention as some of the larger, better-known islands in the Caribbean. So I think it's a process that is unfolding. We don't know exactly what we'll do because we actually don't know exactly what the damage is right now and what the extent of need will be. But I think through our colleagues, and particularly through this gathering in Miami later this month, we hope to have a better answer to that question in the coming weeks. Yes, question in the back?
Do you know how much money the fund has, and how do you decide how to allocate the money from the 25 different?
Well, that too is something that is unfolding in the weeks and months to come. It's a 2-year cycle. Historically, We have been able to contribute approximately $105 million to watch sites from 1996 to now, and that has in turn leveraged another $200 million from other organizations, whether it's organizations such as UNESCO or governmental agencies or private philanthropy. So we never know at the beginning of the cycle exactly what we'll do. Clearly, American Express, as founding sponsor, and as Richard noted, they've given $18 million to watch sites in the past. So every cycle we start anew with philanthropic efforts and working with our partners around the globe. So unfortunately, that's a question I can't answer until 2 years from now, but we work every day to try and find the means to help our partners in the field. Yes?
Besides funding assistance, you have wonderful resources here. How can those resources help in the immediate with the sites that you've selected?
Well, that process is underway now. So with my colleagues here in New York and around the world, we're already in dialogue with a number of the nominators about what the needs are and how we can help. And they run the gamut from sites that need assistance with advocacy campaigns to sites that need assistance with conservation on the ground. Sometimes it's as simple as helping one of our partner institutions convene a workshop or meeting to help address a problem. One past example is there were a number of sites in Mexico on the watch a number of years ago that were struggling with issues of protecting fragile material at archaeological sites. And in that cycle, one of the things we were able to do was convene a meeting in Mexico of major stakeholders on the issue of archaeological covers. And that was one of those things that was so successful, we actually repeated the same workshop in Guatemala. So I think that one of the things we try and do on the staff is find ways that our technical expertise can help sites. There are also examples in the past of, for instance, sites that simply needed better governmental protection. So the Damia Dolman field in Jordan was a site a number of cycles ago that what it needed more than anything else was an official boundary established and to have the site put under the jurisdiction of the Department of Antiquities. So that's one where working with partners, advocating for better protection is not necessarily something that costs a lot of money, but it takes rolling up your sleeves and figuring out who to work with and how to make an effective solution possible.
As a follow-up, does that essentially the sites are building a relationship with the World Monument Fund, and it can essentially explore ways of working together.
Exactly.
Resources. So that is a two-way. We can the sites can approach you, and you can reach out to the sites in terms of ways to help.
Exactly, and sometimes it's World Monuments Fund can serve as a matchmaker. Sometimes we know of another organization that could be very, very helpful, whether it's technical expertise or the potential for funding. And so sometimes what we offer is access to a network. So being part of the World Monuments Watch may be direct assistance from us, may just be the power of being noticed on the list, or it may be the opportunity to have introductions. So it's, like all nonprofit organizations, it's a little bit of everything and trying to make it work in the end. I saw another hand on this side. Okay, another question from Facebook.
James Bill wants to know more about Buffalo train station and what we hope the outcome will be.
Well, that's probably a longer response, but I think the short answer is many of us who live here in New York State have followed the saga of the Buffalo Central Terminal for some time. It's a magnificent station that is no longer serving its traditional purpose. It's an anchor of the community, so there's very strong local support to find a solution for the building. The local advocacy group in Buffalo that's been working on finding a future solution, they've held a lot of events in the building to remind people that it's there and to show it's a viable opportunity for adaptive reuse. I think the main stumbling block that they're facing right now is finding a developer to work with. A number of people have expressed interest, and a number of development opportunities have been explored. So that's an instance where what we hope through the watch is we can help reinforce the advocacy efforts and help them build their case more and more, that this is an example of a historic building that should not be let go, not only because of its beauty and architectural significance, but really because if you let an anchor of the community go, you risk so much more to the local residents in that community. I think there was a question on this side. Yes, in the back? I think I have to ask my colleagues if they can come up with an example. I have a feeling when I say no, we've never done this before, 10 minutes from now, we'll all come up with examples. I think that certainly there are many sites that have been on the watch that are of social significance as well as architectural significance. So for instance, Tomo Port Town, which was on the watch early on, I think 1998 or 2000, is a traditional fishing village in Japan that was threatened with demolition because an arterial road was going to be built. And you would not have called them out for their architectural beauty. It was really the significance of this longstanding community along the water. And eventually, through the watch and advocacy efforts, decision was made to move the road so that the fishing village could survive. So I think that social importance has been embedded in the watch, but I think the Alabama civil rights sites represent the first example of something that really is about a profound social movement. And so I think this is a historic opportunity for us to demonstrate that these sites are as significant as any of the sites that have been on the watch in the past that might have been there more purely for their architectural significance. And I think the decision to do that is really going back to the very first question that was asked. Our decisions are very driven by what comes in any cycle. So the field changes, and as the field evolves, the type of applications that come in for the watch change. So the kinds of nominations we got in 1996 and 1998 and 2000 that were very much about singular buildings, we really don't get that many nominations like that anymore. The field has evolved to look through a slightly different prism. And so that's what makes the field so fantastic, is that it really isn't only about buildings. It's very much about buildings and their connection to the people who surround them. So I think the Alabama Civil Rights sites represent a new opportunity for World Monuments Fund as well, but it also is very reflective of where the field is at the moment. Wendy, I'll get to you next, but there's a question right behind you.
With the news that the U.S. is going to be coming out of UNESCO, how might that affect the actions of the fund, if at all?
Well, that is a very complex question with a very complex set of answers. I think that the U.S. withdrew from UNESCO in 1984 and returned to UNESCO in 2002. So we have the precedent that life goes on. Governments can make decisions to withdraw from international agreements and international bodies. I think for World Monuments Fund, we're a independent nonprofit agency. I mean, our work will continue on. Obviously, when the government that represents your country withdraws from a body such as UNESCO, there are bound to be difficulties that arise and implications. We might not know what they are today. The U.S. will not actually formally withdraw until December 31st, 2018. So we have some time to understand what the implications may be and what the future holds. World Monuments Fund has observer status at UNESCO, so we will continue to participate as long as we continue to have observer status. And we will continue to collaborate with our colleagues around the world. We've been doing this since 1965, and our commitment remains very, very strong to work on the international platform and be part of the international preservation dialogue. Wendy?
How is it that a city in Yemen would apply for help in the middle of a war?
Well, the internet and social media and email keeps us all connected, even under the most dire circumstances. In this case, a consultant who has worked for World Monuments Fund in a number of countries around the world is very connected to the university in Taiz. And he, along with other colleagues at the university in Taiz, put forward the nomination. And, their hope more than anything is to develop opportunities for documenting the heritage sites in the city. Taiz is very much cut off from the world right now. The war really is raging right around them in Yemen. And I think for us, it was also a way to remind people that the conflict, regrettably, is not just in Iraq and Syria, but spreading to many other countries, and Yemen has been especially hard hit in recent years. And so I think the person who was most responsible for the nomination was fortunately somebody in our network and had the wherewithal to, go through the process and upload the nomination to our system. So even in the worst of times, the internet keeps working. So, we have the blessing, I think, in today's world that we can stay connected with a lot of people even under adverse circumstances. Any more questions from Facebook, Hillary? Well, unless there are any other questions. Oh, I see one hand in the back. Well, it's of course different in every single circumstance, but on the whole, frequently the watch has been catalytic, so that there are numerous examples across all watch cycles where the watch provided a spark that really allowed something to happen. And I think it runs the gamut from financial support to governmental protection. And to give some quick examples, in Marcusani in Peru, a rock art site, when it was on the watch, the threat was the advancing encroachment due to industrial activity and mining. And the goal there really was to get better government protection and a more universally accepted boundary for the site. And so I think the watch there did really kickstart the opportunity in Peru to have that conversation. They really did need outside validation to demonstrate that this was a true threat and something that needed to be addressed. I think similarly in Peru, in 2008, San Pedro Apostol in Andahuaylas was on the watch. And this looks like a very humble adobe church just south of Cusco. It actually is an extraordinary explosion of Baroque painting inside, often called the Sistine Chapel of the Andes. And that was an example where their initial goal was restoring the interior of the church, but World Monuments Fund watch and subsequent attention led to the entire town being declared a historic urban center in Peru, which had never happened. The university became involved in a very large oral history program, and they eventually inaugurated an annual Patrimony Day. So I think putting that on the watch turned a very simple idea about conservation into an entire movement in the town. So much so that the Grupo Patrimonial, that was involved with us won the Travel and Leisure Global Vision Award a few years later. And then that group in turn nominated a site to the 2014 World Monuments Watch. So I think sometimes these sparks actually have a long burning fuse. And so it's not just what happens immediately afterward, it's really galvanizing efforts that often can lead to long sustained interest in communities. And I think the final example, to look at one that's more directly in the conservation mode, in 1996, the Temple of Hercules in Rome was on the watch. It's one of two remaining Republican-era temples and the last remaining Greek-style temple in Rome. And everybody had kind of agreed that that part of Rome had become a little forlorn and the monuments were looking sad. There was great euphoria for 2000 Jubilee year and getting that temple restored, which happened. And then as soon as that happened, everybody sort of looked 10 feet away and said, wow, the Temple of Portunus looks a little sad now. Here's the Temple of Hercules really gleaming and bright. And so it came on the watch in 2006 and was subsequently restored. And I can say that I was with a group of people from the Italian government standing on the porch of the Temple of Portunus, looking across the way to the Arch of Janus. And we had a discussion where we all said, you know, the last remaining piece of the Forum Boarium is the Arch of Janus, and look how sad it looks with that fence around it. And so I think that's one example where, you know, in the beginning it was about the Temple of Hercules, and by the time we got to the Arch of Janus, it was really about reactivating a zone in Rome that was going to bring back to public attention a group of buildings that were very, very important, but also reactivate their historic connection to the Palatine Hill. So this has lit a spark with the Italian authorities, who are very much now behind not just restoring the buildings, but finding ways for modern tourists, visitors to the city, and residents to understand that that sort of arc of activity in antiquity that brought people from the marketplace up to the Palatine Hill to the Forum can actually be reestablished for people today. So I think that there are a lot of anecdotes that show the watch has the power to get people thinking in creative ways. And so, as I said earlier, we ourselves have contributed more than $100 million, and it has leveraged more than double that from outside actors. But I think more than just the money, it's an opportunity to think broadly about what heritage is and how we want to experience it, excuse me, how we want to experience it today. Yes, last question.
Sorry,
that's okay.
On behalf of the Governor General of Antigua and Barbuda, we want to thank the fund and American Express for your support in selecting Government House.
Thank you. We're very excited, and sadly, it came to us originally because of an exciting opportunity to think about Government House in new ways, and then, of course, we were all devastated to see the damage in Barbuda, and even though Government House sits on Antigua, you know, I'm certainly in your minds now, and in the minds of those authorities, there are lots of new needs. So we hope to work with everyone on what's the best solution for Government House. Thank you for coming.